You're listening to Echoes from the Margins, the podcast that explores the quiet courage it takes to live truthfully in a world that often demands we shrink ourselves to fit in. In this episode, we look at pride, not just as a parade, but as a daily act of presence and quiet defiance. We explore how pride is celebrated, resisted, and quietly held across the world, from cities where flags wave freely to places where truth can be dangerous. And we take time to honor those often overlooked during Pride, whose stories shaped the freedoms many now celebrate, yet who still find themselves at the edges of the rainbow. We ask, what does it cost to belong, and what does it mean to belong to ourselves without apology? Here's Michael.
You know, there's something quietly powerful about seeing a pride flag fluttering in a place it never used to be. A shop window, a small town hall, a rural cafe, or the quiet corner of a school notice board. It's a sign of progress, of welcome, of visibility. And yet, even in the bright colours of pride, there can be a quiet tension we rarely name. The tension between belonging and fitting in. Because fitting in often comes at a cost. It asks us to smooth out our rough edges, to hide the parts of ourselves that don't align with what's easy for others to accept. It asks us to calculate which parts of ourselves are safe to share and which should remain tucked away. Many who live at the margins know this cost intimately. It's a quiet calculation before we speak, before we walk into a room, before we post on social media, before we attend a family gathering. For LGBTQ plus people during Pride, it can be a moment of tension, even in celebration. Some feel the pressure to appear joyful, to wave flags, to show up in ways that may not match the complexity of who they are or how they feel. Others must decide whether to be visible at all, weighing safety, family reactions, and community judgment. And for many around the world, Pride is not a parade at all, but an act of quiet courage. In over 60 countries, same-sex relationships are criminalised, and in some, the penalty can be death. In places like Uganda, Brunei, and parts of the Middle East, living truthfully is not only socially dangerous, but it can be a matter of survival. In Russia, Pride marches have been banned or broken up, and activists are detained. In parts of Eastern Europe, rainbow flags are ripped down and communities are harassed for simply gathering. Even where Pride events take place, they may be met with hostility, protest, threats, or violence. In South Korea, Pride marchers often face counter-demonstrations. In Turkey, Pride parades have been repeatedly banned, with participants tear-gassed or arrested. In Poland, activists have faced harassment under so-called LGBT-free zones. In Malaysia and Indonesia, arrests have been made during quiet gatherings where people dared to share their truth. And yet, people still show up, quietly or boldly, carrying the belief that being themselves should not be a punishable act. The cost of belonging in these contexts is not theoretical. It can be measured in risk, in fear, in exile, in the grief of losing family and community ties, in the threat of imprisonment. In these places, Pride is not a glitter-covered event. It's a whispered prayer for safety, a coded message of solidarity, a small pin hidden under a jacket, a private celebration amongst trusted friends. It's not about public applause, but about survival with dignity. And there are others, often overlooked at Pride, even in countries where it's celebrated. I'm thinking of the older LGBTQ plus people who've paved the way for Pride to exist, who protested when it was dangerous, who lived through the fear of criminalisation, who sat by hospital beds during the worst of the AIDS crisis when others turned away. Many of these elders find themselves now at the margins of the very movement they helped build, their stories too easily ignored in a culture that celebrates youth, visibility, and photogenic rainbow moments. These are the people who may not march in the parade, who may not dance in the street, but who carry the history of pride in their bodies and memories. Some are in care homes, where they return to the closet to avoid harassment. Some have lost lifelong partners with no legal recognition or protection in their final years. Some watch the glitter and the hashtags and feel both joy at the progress and grief at what was lost along the way. The Irish poet John O'Donoghue once wrote about the invisible thresholds we cross as we age, thresholds that are both tender and lonely. For many older LGBTQ+ people, pride can be a reminder of thresholds crossed alone, or the price they paid for truth we now hold more openly. When we think about pride, let us remember these elders. Let us remember that visibility is not only for the young, that the rainbow should stretch to include the grey, the frail and the quiet, the ones whose courage was lived in decades of small, daily defiance. And it's not just about pride. This calculation of whether to speak, to stand out, to be fully seen, lives in many experiences. The neurodivergent employee who masks in a meeting to avoid questions. The person living with chronic illnesses who hides their fatigue so they won't seem to be seen as unreliable. The person of colour in a workplace where jokes are made that require a smile, even when they cut deep. The older person in a fast-moving digital culture, feeling the pressure to keep up with trends to avoid being deemed irrelevant. We're told that inclusion is the goal, that we're moving towards a more welcoming world. And yes, many places are better than they were. But inclusion often asks for a quiet exchange. We will include you, but only if you can be palatable, relatable, and not too different. Not too angry, not too loud, and not too needy. In this way, belonging is confused with fitting in. And yet, to fit in at the expense of ourselves is to pay too high a price. We end up belonging nowhere, not even to ourselves. In many indigenous cultures, the idea of community is different. It's not built on uniformity, but on respect for difference. The Apache tradition has a saying, "Wisdom sits in places." It's a reminder that knowledge and truth exist in many forms, and that everyone, regardless of age, health, gender, or circumstances, carries wisdom needed by the community. Belonging in these communities is given by existence, not earned by conformity. What if we held this perspective when we think about pride and about inclusion? What if pride was not only the right to be visible, but also the right to be complex, to be whole, to be contradictory, to be in process? The Stoics, with their insistence on living in accordance with nature, reminded us that our inner integrity is more important than the opinions of others. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The opinion of 10,000 men is of no value if none of them know anything about the subject." Sometimes the subject is you, your life, and your dignity. Seneca reminds us, "No man is more unhappy than when he has never faced adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself." For many at the margins, adversity is not chosen, but encountered in the daily act of living truthfully in a world that may prefer you to be easier to manage. Each act of gentle truthfulness, each moment you refuse to erase yourself, is proof that your life is yours. Living in alignment with your nature may cost you. It may cost you comfort, ease, and at times even community. But it also grants you a deeper kind of knowledge, the belonging to yourself. This is true whether you live in São Paulo, where pride gathers millions in a celebration of joy and resistance, or in a small rural town in Ireland, where a single rainbow flag in a cafe window feels like a small revolution. Whether you're in Lagos, where LGBTQ+ activism persists under heavy social stigma, or in a suburb of Sydney, where pride is embraced but invisibility still creeps into family conversations. Whether you're 22 or 82, the work of belonging to yourself remains the same. During Pride, this can mean choosing to show up in your own way. If your Pride looks like a parade, let it be so. If it looks like a quiet cup of tea in a kitchen with someone who sees you as you are, let that be so too. If it means saying nothing in a family chat, preserving your energy, let it be so. If it means attending an elders' lunch instead of a street party, let that be pride too. If it means walking quietly through a city that does not welcome you, with your truth tucked safely into your chest, let that be pride too. There is no one way to belong to yourself. And for those who stand as allies, there is a call too. True allyship does not ask the marginalised to perform gratitude for partial acceptance. It asks us to do the work of creating spaces where complexity is allowed, where contradictions are respected, where silence is not punished, and where joy does not have to be loud to be real. Pride, like belonging, should not demand we abandon ourselves for acceptance. It should not require the masking of who we are or the sanitizing of our stories to fit someone else's comfort. It should allow for quiet pride, complex pride, even pride that looks like grief for what has been lost to intolerance, or a quiet nod to those who came before us and made these moments possible. Imagine if our broader communities reflected that. If workplaces valued difference as a source of wisdom, not a challenge to be managed. If societies learn that progress is not measured by rainbow logos in June or July, but by the daily safety and dignity afforded to those at the margins. You see, there's a quiet form of resistance in living as yourself without apology, even when the world demands that you adjust. This resistance may not always be a megaphone. Sometimes it needs only your quiet commitment to show up as you are, with kindness for yourself, and with the knowledge that dignity is not granted by others, it's claimed by living honestly. During this Pride Month, as flags wave in some places and are torn down in others, let them remind us to celebrate those who show up quietly, who may not march, who may not wave a flag, who may not post on social media, but who carry their truths like a small flame. That flame is no less bright for being held close. For those listening who find the cost of belonging too high, I want you to consider this. It may not be true belonging you are seeking, but simply a place to fit in. True belonging does not demand your silence. It does not require your perfection. It does not ask you to trade your truth for a seat at the table. Pride in its truest sense is not about performance. It's about presence. It's about knowing that you deserve to exist as you are, whether in the noise of a parade or the quiet of your own room, whether in a country that celebrates your being or in a place where your truth is a quiet act of bravery. And for those who feel safe, who feel accepted, who feel seen, maybe this is a reminder to hold the door open for others, to create room at the table, to use your safety not as a shield of indifference, but as a tool for building a wider welcome. As we walk forward, let us remember that those on the margins are not there because they lack worth, but often because they refuse to shrink themselves to fit in. Let us honour that refusal in ourselves and in others. Because sometimes the greatest act of pride and the deepest belonging is to live as you are, unapologetically, and to take up your rightful space in the world, even if that space is carved quietly, even if it's carved carefully, and even if it's carved with trembling hands.
Thank you for listening to Echoes from the Margins. If this episode has given you something to reflect on, or if it has reminded you of your own quiet courage, we'd love if you shared it with someone who might need to hear it today. If you're interested in exploring how philosophy, psychology, and emotional intelligence can guide us through the challenges of everyday life, you might also enjoy Mind the Gap. It's a companion podcast where we take a closer look at how we think, feel, and lead, all in 10-minute conversations designed to fit into your day. You can find Mind the Gap wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, may you find the courage to live as you are, unapologetically, and to take up your rightful space in the world.